Okay, so you sent this article over evaluating nutritional expertise, and
A Guide to Diet
a
Guru.
guide to diet gurus. Yeah, and I- I've got to say the title alone, it
It
was,
grabs you.
yeah, it grabs you. I was like, what are we gonna be, like nutrition detectives or something?
Well, in a way, yeah. I mean, it's written by William Wilson, and it's really about figuring out, who to trust in this very crowded field of nutrition.
Because yeah,
Experts.
it's like a jungle out there, right? Like it can be so confusing. Like
Yeah,
1 minute something is a superfood, and the next minute it's like
right.
public enemy number one.
Exactly. And this article really gets down to how do you cut through all that noise? And there's a very practical framework he presents for
Yeah.
evaluating anybody who claims to be a nutrition expert.
Okay, so what is this framework?
He calls me the fabulous 5 criteria.
I love it.
And it's really like
It's catchy.
a set of lenses through which you can look at anyone and say,
Yeah.
okay, how credible are they?
Okay, so what are the fabulous 5?
Okay. Well, the first one he focuses on is a blend of personal qualities, open-mindedness, intelligence, wisdom, and communication skills.
So like anybody, right?
Well, you would think, right, any expert should have that. But his point is that it's not just about having the knowledge. It's also about being able to communicate.
Right, because you can be
Exactly.
the most brilliant scientist in the world, but if you can't explain what you're doing to anybody,
Exactly.
what good is it?
Yeah.
It's like the tree falling in the forest.
Nobody hears it.
Exactly.
So, yes, that's the first one.
Okay.
The second one is formal education and training.
Okay.
And here he really emphasizes, credentials, degrees in nutrition, biology, medicine, things that are related to this field.
Right.
So it's not just,
So it's not enough to be passionate about it.
Exactly. You need to have the
You
background,
need to have the
the
background.
science background.
Got it. Okay. What's number 3?
Number 3 is the ability to understand and utilize the scientific literature.
Okay.
And what he's talking about here is, not just reading the headlines of, whatever's coming out,
Right.
but to actually understand research methodology, be able to, critically evaluate studies and keep abreast of all the latest findings.
So basically, you eat, breathe, and sleep science.
That's it. He even says that in the article, Think and Breathe Science.
There you go.
And
Yeah.
ideally,
I love it.
these people are also contributing to the scientific conversation
Yeah.
by publishing their own research.
Right.
In peer-reviewed journals.
Of course. Okay, so that's 3. What about number 4?
Number 4 is clinical exposure and observation.
So not just book smarts, but like real-world experience.
Exactly. And that's because working with patients and clients
Yeah.
allows these, experts to see how different approaches
Yeah.
play out in real life.
Okay.
There are just nuances there that you might not get just from reading a textbook.
Of course. Okay, we're on a roll here. We got 4. What about the 5th one?
The 5th one he calls skin in the game.
Ooh, okay.
And what he means by that is that he believes the best experts are those who are invested in the outcomes of their advice.
Right.
They have something to lose
Yeah.
if their recommendations prove to be ineffective or harmful.
So they're not just talking the talk.
Right.
They're walking the walk.
Exactly.
I'm like that. Okay, so now I'm dying to know.
Yeah.
How does this play out with some real-world examples? So, like, did he rank people?
He did. He actually ranks quite a few people, and it's really interesting, some of the rankings. For example, he ranks Gary Taubes,
Okay.
the author of Why We Get Fat.
Yeah, surprisingly low.
Really? Why is that?
He's like 1 out of 5. Wow.
And, the main reason for that is he says even though he's a very successful science writer,
Yeah.
he lacks formal education in nutrition.
Interesting.
So his interpretation of the research might be skewed
because he didn't have that base.
without that foundational knowledge.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's an example of somebody who's ranked low.
Okay, that's really interesting. So who are some people who he ranked high?
Well, on the high end, we have people like Dr. David Katz, who's well known for his work in lifestyle medicine.
Okay.
And then another one is Dr. Richard Johnson, who's done a lot of research on fructose metabolism
Oh, yeah. I've heard him speak.
and its impact on...
Like online.
Yeah, he's great.
He's great. He's really good at explaining that stuff.
He really is. And then Dr. Robert Lustig.
Oh, yeah.
He's an endocrinologist
Yeah.
who's really brought a lot of attention to the dangers of added sugar.
Dr. Lustig, yeah, he's incredible. I mean,
He is.
he's so passionate about
He is.
educating people about this stuff.
Exactly. And speaking of that, I think it's worth mentioning Emory Pharma
Okay.
and their commitment to science and transparency, because they actually have a lot of interviews
Well, really?
and seminars on their website
Wow.
with Dr. Lustig and Dr. Johnson and even Dr. Wilson. So if anybody wants to sort of
Yeah, I've heard of them.
go straight to the source,
They're really good about, like, making this information
yeah, they're committed to it.
accessible. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got the Fabulous 5.
Yeah.
We've got some examples of who ranks where.
Uh-huh.
So how do we actually use this in our daily lives?
Yeah, that's the question, right? Because we're bombarded with information constantly.
Constantly.
It's like drinking from a fire hose.
It is.
But that's where the Fabulous Five really come in. You can think of them as a filter
Okay.
for sifting through all that noise and identifying the sources that are really worth your time and attention. So it's like you have this mental checklist.
I like that. Okay.
Right.
So let's put it to the test. Let's say I'm curious about the ketogenic diet. Everybody's talking about keto.
Right.
How can I tell if the people who are promoting it are legit?
Okay, so let's apply the Fabulous Five
Okay.
first communication skills. There are definitely keto proponents out there who are incredibly articulate and engaging.
Right.
You know, they write best-selling books.
Mm-hmm.
They host podcasts. They have a huge online presence.
So they check that box. What about formal education and training? Are they actually qualified to give this advice?
That's where it gets a little interesting.
Okay.
Some of the leading keto voices do have backgrounds, in medicine or nutrition, but there are also plenty who don't.
So it's a mixed bag.
It is a mixed bag. And
Okay.
so that's where doing a little digging
Yeah.
can be helpful.
Look at their bios.
Look at their bios, check their credentials.
Okay.
Are they citing research from reputable sources?
Yeah.
Or are they mostly relying on anecdotes and personal experiences?
Okay, makes sense. What about the scientific literature itself?
Yeah.
Is there solid research to support these claims being made about keto?
There's a good amount of research on keto.
Okay.
Some studies have shown promising results for weight loss and certain metabolic markers, but as with any diet, the research isn't conclusive.
Of course.
And there can be long-term effects that we don't fully understand yet.
Yeah, it's not a magic bullet, right? And so this is where I guess that critical thinking piece comes in too. Like,
Exactly.
just because a study shows a positive result doesn't mean that it's the right approach for every single person.
Right. And you always have to look at who funded the research.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
And, are there conflicts of interest and all of that?
Absolutely. Okay, what about clinical exposure and observation?
Yeah.
Has keto been around long enough for experts to see what its long-term effects are
That's a good question.
on people?
It seems like it sort of exploded onto the scene
It did,
a
right?
few years ago.
Yeah.
And while, some clinicians have incorporated it into their practice, it's still a relatively new approach compared to, say,
Yeah.
the Mediterranean diet,
Right, which has been around forever.
which has been studied for decades.
Yeah.
So that long-term data is still being gathered.
So I guess a little less skin in the game just because it's so new.
Yeah, you could say that it's not a deal breaker,
Right.
but it's something to consider,
Sure. Okay, so how about something like the Mediterranean diet then?
Yeah, so the Mediterranean diet scores very high.
Yeah, everybody loves the Mediterranean diet.
On all of Wilson's criteria,
Give me the olive oil, the fresh produce,
it's delicious.
the fish.
It is, and it has this really solid foundation of research,
Yeah.
Behind it that supports the claims about its benefits.
What about the clinical exposure part of it?
Oh, huge.
Yeah.
Because this way of eating
Right.
has been practiced for centuries in
Right.
the regions bordering the Mediterranean seas.
Yeah.
So doctors and researchers have been able to observe its effects on populations.
Over a long period of time.
Yeah, over very long periods of time.
So it's got that long-term data that's been collected sort of naturally.
Yes, exactly. And it's not just about the latest scientific study.
Right.
It's about that collective wisdom that's been accumulated over time.
So that's where that skin in the game is really there, right? Because it's
It's a
like,
huge thing in the game.
yeah, it's culturally, it's historically,
Yeah, it's been intertwined with...
it's a way of life.
Exactly.
It's not just a diet, it's a way of life.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Okay, so we talked about keto, which is like a very specific diet plan.
Right.
We talked about the Mediterranean diet, which is more like a way of eating.
More of a pattern.
Yeah, what about something like intermittent fasting?
Yeah.
It's not what you eat, it's when you eat.
Right.
How does that fit in?
That's a really interesting one.
Yeah.
In terms of communication, intermittent fasting definitely has
Yeah.
some charismatic proponents who have popularized it very effectively.
Right.
And there's definitely a growing body of research
Yeah.
that's exploring
Trying it, yeah.
its potential benefits.
Right. But it still feels like there's a lot we don't know.
There is a lot we don't know.
Yeah.
It's a relatively new area of research.
Okay.
Long-term studies are still underway.
Okay.
So while it might show promise, that skin in the game element is not as strong as it is for more established dietary approaches.
Okay, I'm starting to see how these Fabulous Five could really help us, like, wade through all this. It's like a
Right.
superpower or something.
It is.
Yeah. Okay, so let's keep going. What about veganism?
Veganism.
That's a hot topic, right?
It is a hot topic, and when we apply the Fabulous Five, we see both strengths and areas where maybe more critical thinking is needed.
Okay.
On the plus side, there are many well-educated and articulate advocates
Mm-hmm.
for veganism who are very effectively communicating the ethical and environmental aspects aspects of it.
Right. And there's also a lot of research coming out about the health benefits of a plant-based diet.
Absolutely. Studies have shown that, vegan diets can be very beneficial for heart health,
Right.
blood sugar control, even reducing the risk of certain chronic diseases, but it's not without its challenges.
What would some of those be?
Well, meeting certain nutritional needs
Okay.
on a vegan diet requires very careful planning.
Sure.
Nutrients like vitamin B12, iron, omega-3 fatty acids can be harder to obtain
Right.
from plant sources alone.
So it's not just as simple as cutting out all animal products. You have to think about it.
You have to be mindful
You got to really do your research.
and potentially consider supplementation.
Yeah. Okay. What about gluten-free diets?
Yeah, gluten-free.
That's another one that's just exploded in
Yes.
popularity.
And this is where the Fabulous Five can be really helpful because
Yeah.
they can really help separate fact from fiction.
Okay.
So, for people with celiac disease, obviously a gluten-free diet is a medical necessity.
Right.
It's not a choice.
Of course.
But for those without celiac disease, going gluten-free is a bit more nuanced.
Yeah, because I've heard people say they feel better when they cut out gluten, even if they don't have celiac.
Right. And there's a condition called non-celiac gluten sensitivity where individuals do experience symptoms
Right.
like bloating and digestive discomfort after consuming gluten. But the scientific understanding of this condition is still evolving.
So it's not as clear-cut
It's not as clear-cut
as celiac.
as celiac disease, no, and that's why it's really important to consult with a healthcare professional
Okay. If
if you think you have an issue.
you might have a gluten sensitivity,
Okay.
so they can really help you determine if a gluten-free diet is truly necessary.
Okay, so I guess the bottom line is just because a diet is trendy or has some potential benefits
Yeah.
doesn't mean it's right for everyone.
Right.
It's about really understanding the nuances and making informed decisions.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of the Fabulous Five.
Yeah,
It's not about telling you what to eat.
right.
It's about giving you the tools to critically evaluate the information
Yeah,
out there.
I like it. Okay, so we covered keto, Mediterranean, intermittent fasting,
Right.
vegan, gluten-free. What else is out there?
Well, there's one that's been gaining popularity for its focus on what our ancestors avoid.
Oh, the paleo
The
diet.
paleo diet.
Yeah, caveman diet. Exactly. So meat, nuts, berries.
Yeah.
Anything our hunter-gatherer ancestors would have eaten.
Back in the day.
And it does have some compelling aspects.
Okay.
It encourages eating whole, unprocessed foods,
Right.
similar to the Mediterranean diet.
Okay.
But it also eliminates entire food groups,
Okay, like what?
like grains and dairy,
Really?
which raises some questions.
Because those provide important nutrients, right?
They do, and that's where the Fabulous Five can help us dig a little deeper.
Okay.
Does the scientific literature really support
Right.
eliminating those food groups for most people?
Yeah.
Are there potential long-term risks
Mhm.
or nutrient deficiencies that need to be considered? And how much skin in the game do the proponents of paleo
Right.
really
Thank God. So it's not just about like, I heard this is good, I'm going to try it.
Right.
It's about really thinking critically
Asking those questions.
about all this stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, what about low-carb diets?
Yeah.
That's been around forever.
It's been around a long time.
Atkins, South Beach, all that stuff.
All the iterations, Atkins, South Beach.
Yeah.
And while they can be effective for weight loss, in the short term, the Fabulous Five remind us to consider the bigger picture.
Okay.
Are these diets sustainable over the long run?
Right.
What are the potential effects on metabolic health, nutrient intake, and who are the experts behind these claims?
Yeah.
What are their credentials?
So many questions. It's amazing how this is making me think about all this.
That's great. That's what we want.
Like in a totally different way.
Yeah, you want to empower yourself
Yeah.
to make these decisions.
Totally.
Now, there's another concept
Okay.
that's less about specific rules
Okay.
and more about a mindful approach to eating.
Oh, I like that.
And it's called intuitive eating.
Intuitive eating.
Yeah.
Okay, tell me more.
So it encourages tuning into your body's
Yeah.
natural hunger and fullness cues
Okay.
and making peace with food.
Okay. But can you really trust your intuition when it comes to food?
That's a great question.
Well, what about cravings and emotional eating and all that?
Yeah, those are all addressed
Yeah.
in the intuitive eating approach.
Right.
It's not about, ignoring your cravings or
Right.
pretending they don't exist.
Okay.
It's about learning to understand them,
Uh-huh.
to differentiate between physical hunger and emotional hunger,
Yeah.
and to make choices that nourish your body and your mind.
It's like retraining your brain to have a healthier relationship with food.
Exactly. And there's a growing body of research that suggests that intuitive eating can be very effective
Okay.
for improving body image, reducing disordered eating patterns,
Yeah.
and just promoting overall well-being.
I love that. Okay. So much great information. We've covered a lot of ground today.
Yes.
We've explored all these different diets. We've got our Fabulous Five criteria.
Huh.
what are some of the key takeaways we can leave our listeners with?
Well, I think the most important takeaway is that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to nutrition.
Right.
What works for one person might not be right for another.
It's about bioindividuality.
Exactly. It's about finding what works best for your individual needs,
Right.
your preferences, your lifestyle.
Exactly.
And just as importantly, it's about being a critical consumer of information.
Yeah.
We're bombarded with messages about what to eat all the time.
Constant.
So we need to be able to sift through all that noise.
That's where the Fabulous Five come in.
That's it.
They're like our...
Your secret weapon for navigating this world.
This has been so eye-opening. I feel like I have a whole new perspective
I'm glad to hear that.
on this stuff.
And remember, this is just the beginning of your journey. There's always more to learn
Right.
when it comes to food and health.
Okay, so what's next?
Well, I think it's time to move beyond specific diets
Okay.
and delve into some broader concepts
Okay.
that can help us make sense of this ever-evolving world of nutrition.
Sounds good to me. I'm ready.
Okay, great. Let's start by exploring the concept of bioindividuality.
Bioindividuality. Okay, I like the sound of that.
Yeah.
It kind of goes hand in hand with everything we've been talking about.
It does. It challenges the notion of a one-size-fits-all approach
Mm-hmm.
to nutrition, and it encourages us to really tune into our bodies
Yeah.
and discover what truly nourishes us as individuals.
I'm intrigued. Let's dive in. So bioindividuality, it's like the anti-diet, right?
It really is.
I love it.
It's a whole different way of looking at things.
Yeah, so how do we do that? How do we tap into that and figure out what works for us?
Well, it starts with paying attention.
Okay.
Notice how different foods make you feel,
Okay.
and not just physically, but also mentally and emotionally.
So it's not just like, did this give me a stomach ache, but did this
Right.
make me feel good?
Did it give you energy? Did it make you feel sluggish?
Did it make me want to take a nap?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So tuning into those subtle cues,
Okay.
recognizing that your body is giving you feedback all the time.
My body's talking to me.
It is.
Okay, got it. So paying attention, that's step one. What else?
Experiment.
Okay.
Don't be afraid to try different foods and see how your body responds.
Okay.
Keep a food journal,
Yeah.
track your energy levels, your mood,
Mhm.
your digestion, look for patterns.
So I'm like a scientist in my own
Yeah.
kitchen.
I love that.
That's awesome.
And as you gather data,
Yeah.
you'll start to see which foods really nourish you
Yeah.
and which ones might not be serving you as well.
It's so cool. I love this idea of like taking control.
It's empowering,
Yeah.
and it's important to remember that bioindividuality extends beyond food.
Okay.
It also includes things like, sleep stress management movement, even our social connections,
So it's really taking a
a
holistic
holistic view of health.
Exactly.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I
Yeah.
want to leave you with a few questions
Okay, hit me.
to ponder. Okay.
Okay.
If you were to create your own personal Fabulous 5 criteria for evaluating health advice,
Okay.
what would they be?
I love that question. I'm going to have to think about that.
Yeah. And how has this deep dive changed the way you think about nutrition and your own personal health journey?
I mean, honestly, it's been a game changer.
That's great.
I feel like I've gone from feeling like really overwhelmed by all this information
Yeah.
to having this like framework to make sense of it all.
That's fantastic.
And I love this idea of bioindividuality. It's so
It's empowering.
empowering.
It is.
It's awesome. Okay, well, thank you so much for this
My pleasure.
deep dive. This has been really incredible.
Thanks for having me.
And to our listeners, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes.
And remember, your health is your greatest asset,
Absolutely.
and you have the power to make informed choices
You do.
that support your well-being.
That's right.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed,
And stay nourished.
and stay nourished.